Great. Great. 201. Wow. A lot of people on time. Thank you so much.
Oh, let me get my ear.
Yep. So welcome to the Q&A for the Pandemic Stress Management. And I'm Tina Choi. I'm the CEO and founder of Travonde. And I know a lot of you know what our mission is, but just to say our mission is to build healthier, happier communities all over the world. And I want to thank Bruce from Redwood City and Barbara from Adaptive PE for partnering with us to put this event for our community at this critical time. And we know that COVID-19 has disrupted all our lives. People of all populations all over the world are experiencing stress and deep anxiety about life. And we're all thinking, Dr. Gordon, how do we cope during this period? So here to talk about this is Dr. Robert Gordon. Let me just give you a very brief introduction of Dr. Gordon. He is a licensed psychologist and a diplomate of clinical psychology and a diplomate of psychoanalysis, and served on the governing council of the American Psychological Association. And he has authored many scholarly articles and books on psychodiagnostic and relationship issues. Dr. Gordon, I have one of your books on my shelf, the I Love You Madly on Passion, Personality, and Personal Growth. So we are so honored to have you here today. Welcome, Dr. Gordon.
Thank you, Tina. I'll tell you, this is historic times. And historic times doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. It's a traumatic period. It's a traumatic period with layers of trauma on top of trauma. Over millions of years, the human brain evolved to cope with trauma, or else we wouldn't be existing today as a species. I mean, the human creature survived all kinds of things. We're alive today. We exist as a species because we have a brain that's incredibly, has an incredible ability to adapt to almost anything. We even had a man on the moon. So you talk about the famine, the warfare, the pestilence, discrimination, genocides, but here we are. This pandemic is extremely dangerous. It's quite lethal. It's fairly easy to get. And to deal with it, we have social isolation. We've moved from basically an embodied world to a virtual world like never before in history. Our brains did not evolve to deal with a virtual world. It was meant to deal with an embodied world, to have a sense of the presence of other people. We're social animals. So this is stressing us. I mean, it's like our unconscious is saying, here, what did I do wrong? I'm being sent to my room. Did I do something bad? You know, it's very disruptive emotionally, and it leads to a lot of symptoms.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Whatever works for you. I can see it though. Yeah. And what's
I'm sorry. Can everybody mute? We're getting a lot of noises. Thank you.
Yeah, we got it. Yeah, so everybody hear that.
Yeah.
Now, people get symptoms. They get symptoms of anxiety. Anxiety about specifically the disease. Anxiety about being in a very different world that we're not used to. Another reaction is...
So what are the symptoms? You talk about symptoms. What are the symptoms that we can see ourselves?
Well, the most common one, Tina, is anxiety. People aren't sure about their financial and work world, their relationships. They may not be able to see their parents and grandparents. In my case, grandchildren. For lovers, it could be a real problem if they're not living together or meeting people, having the support of friends. So our anxiety level goes up. With losses, we expect to get depression. Now, anxiety is that sense of impending dread. Depression is when you're wearing out of your coping mechanisms and you feel like giving up. You really don't have a sense of optimism. I describe anxiety as when you see the Mack truck coming towards you, and depression is after you've been clobbered. That's the difference. They're usually interrelated. Anxiety precedes depression. When you don't get relieved of your anxiety, you're prone towards feeling depressed. And then there's frustration and anger. Just like people were talking about, just angry with people who tell me you have to wear a mask. Now, there are dysfunctional ways of reacting, and there are healthy ways of reacting. If you want, I can get it to them.
So what's the healthy way that you're suggesting for all of us? You mentioned unhealthy coping mechanism. Tell me what the healthy ones are that we can all learn from.
Most important healthy mechanisms is what we call anticipation. I had a patient who a year ago saw her family for Thanksgiving, and her father was drinking too much and her mother was too critical of her, and she came back very depressed. And I said, how long has your father been drinking? She says, most of my life. And how long has your mother been critical? Ever since I can remember. I said, you didn't psychologically prepared for what was inevitable. Was that little girl inside is still hoping for your father to stop drinking and see you, and your mother to stop being critical and to really appreciate you. We all have that child. The child never goes away. What we have to do is talk to that child, hug the child, and say, listen, this is the parents you have. Don't be in denial about it. Don't like it. But don't set yourself up for unrealistic expectations. This has to do with anticipation. I told my patients back in February and March that this is going to last about a year or two. And they said, no, it's not. It's going to be, the president said a couple of weeks, it's going to go away. I said, he's not a scientist. He's not a physician. I said, if you study epidemiology, the virus is part of nature. It's a living thing. It may not be a pandemic. Moderator can mute everybody but me. I think sometimes the moderator can.
Yeah, let me mute everybody and unmute you. Apologize.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you now.
Okay, good. So this has to do with realistic anticipation. The fact is that this pandemic is supposed to last at least a year or two. Now, in evolutionary history, when they talk about herd immunity,
yep.
You know that's when most people die, or a large percentage of people die. You know, in the Black Plague, bubonic plague, you had about half of Europe died. We don't want solutions like that. So we're really looking into the idea of an effective vaccine, and that could take about a year or two. Now, my patients then could prepare for the world that they're living in. It's realistic. It's like my patient going for Thanksgiving. She's prepared realistically, not the parents she deserves or wish she had, but the parents she really does have. We have to deal with reality, not the reality we wish, but the reality we have. And anticipation is one of our healthiest coping mechanisms. And how do we get that? With facts. Now, there's a lot of fake news. There's a lot of rumors. The more fearful people become, the more they hold on to rumors. And you got to know how to fact check. You have to look at the source. And I always tell people, well, where did you get that information? And there's something called a sleeper effect. People will remember the rumor, but not the source. I always tell people, particularly in this world with social media, there are fake news about cures, about conspiracies. The more anxiety goes up, the more the human brain, and it evolved this way, is to buy BS, to buy fake news. Because we're hungry to feel we have some sense of control and we have some kind of information. No, check the best sources. Harvard Medical School, Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins. There's really credible sources. It's not a friend of my friend that knows the physician, okay? Or newsweek.ru, which RU means it came from Russia. Look at the address, from where you're getting your information, but be very, very careful. So you have healthy anticipation. Face reality as it is, not what you want it to be. Now, some people are ill-equipped to deal with reality, different personalities. And Tina, this gets into, I'm a psychoanalyst, and
Yes.
we're a little bit different than psychiatrists and psychologists.
Well, tell us about the different personality styles and how they cope with it. I know that I have friends who are, dating people that are narcissistic or borderline or anxious. Give us some examples of that.
And that's what I like about psychoanalysis. We don't treat symptoms, we treat people.
Mm-hmm.
And as psychoanalyst, it's not a boilerplate, one size fits all psychotherapy. We listen a lot to get to know you. And when we talk about a personality type, even within that type, there's all kinds of differences. Now, there are some types that have, and it's a personality style is mainly genetic. Now, childhood trauma will accentuate your personality style. Say you're born obsessional. Now, I have a PhD, and there's no such thing as a PhD that doesn't have some obsessive compulsiveness. For me to do all my research, I got to be a little bit obsessive compulsive. Now, if I'm too obsessive compulsive, I'll be too perfectionistic and never complete my research. It'll never be good enough. But you want just enough. If I had a lot of childhood traumas on top of my natural tendency to be obsessive compulsive, then I'll get perfectionistic and too detailed and too demanding and never get my work done. So I have a little bit of it. Now, under stress, people become a little bit more obsessional. I started studying masks. What are the best masks? I went all over studying the masks, and I started ordering the best masks I can get. Also, I wanted to know what percentage of rubbing alcohol is the best. Is 50% good enough? And 65% is. Now, that's a good adaptation based on my personality. If I happen to be more neurotic, I'd get crazy about doorknobs and surfaces and never leave my condo. That would be too much so. Some people tend to have a paranoid personality. Now, ever since they were kids, they were kind of suspicious, having trouble with trust. And if they're too paranoid, then they don't want to get near anybody. Everybody is a carrier. There's conspiracies. It's a hoax. And they start believing all kinds of things because they're so anxious, they're ready to believe anything. Paranoids are horrible at fact checking. They'll just believe anything. Then there's the psychopathic personality, sometimes called the sociopathic, the antisocial. The terms are interchangeable. Basically, they look at you like your lunch. Those emails you get from Nigeria that your long lost, it's an attorney from your long lost uncle. How he ended up in Nigeria, I don't know, but he left you $1 billion, and that's all you got to do is send the lawyer $10,000 and you'll get $1 billion. Or it's your lover and she just lost her passport and just sent her somebody. I mean, this happens all over, these scammers. Now, psychopaths enjoy deceiving and exploiting. That's their reason for living. And this COVID-19 is a boom for them because you're going to get emails about all kinds of cures, all kinds of things that scammers are going to jump on that. That's one personality. They love the pandemic. The pandemic is just an opportunity to take advantage of people. Narcissistic people will deal with this. It's all about them. They might not want to wear a mask because it makes them look weak. They might not want a mask because they look attractive in a mask. They might not want to wear a mask because basically they don't care about what they could give to other people. That's a narcissistic orientation. The hysteric is the drama king or queen. They're always dying. If you're sick, they're sicker. Okay, it's like they're always the victim. No matter what, they'll turn it around. If they offend you, you hurt their feelings by telling them how you were offended by them. That's the histrionic. They live for drama. And boy, this pandemic is a great drama for them. Okay, they're always saying some stories.
So Dr. Gordon, talking about that, I have some single friends out there talk about narcissistic personality. They are starting to date in this pandemic. And how do you embrace the slower pace of a pandemic relationship? And your advice on nurturing a healthy relationship during this socially distanced time? I think that's an important topic we talk about all the time. How do you date in this? How do you recognize the narcissists that are out there with COVID-19? What do the single people do out there?
You know, when in the old days, I mean, the real old days, people were arranged. There was arranged marriages. Then starting around the 20th century, people fell in love, and that used to be entertainment, but no one took that seriously. But by the 20th century, and with the women's movement, women would say, wait a second, I really don't care what my family says about who I should marry, or in terms of religion or race or ethnicity. I'm going to be with somebody I have chemistry for. I love this person. That's good and bad, because chemistry is a way your primitive unconscious gets you to over-idealize somebody you hardly know. That's what chemistry is. It's when the hormones are going crazy, and in evolutionary history, the primitive brain wants you to reproduce with someone. A narcissistic man is likely to be a good provider. He'll be a horrible husband, but he could be, for a while in evolutionary history, a person who can manipulate people and bring back more dead animals for you. You know, same thing with the psychopath. If you look at our literature and our films, the sexy men tend to be psychopaths or narcissistic men. You look at the romance novels, the movies, because they are hyper-masculine. And in the female brain, there's an attraction towards that. Men are attracted to women who are fertile. It doesn't matter if they have, as long as they have a great hip-waist ratio, they have youthfulness. She can be an idiot and maybe not a good wife, selfish. But a man will be sexually attracted to that. Chemistry is the worst thing to go by when you're picking a mate. The very worst thing. It's great for picking a lover. It's great for eroticism. So the paradigm shift from the traditional society of picking someone that made your family happy led to stability, but it wasn't really very passionate, very loving relationship. It was a business partnership. It was for continuity of your nationality, your ethnicity, your religion. And by the 20th century, we have problems with a high divorce rate because we went further away from that into the idea of chemistry. And chemistry is the most irrational part of the brain. And if you just follow chemistry, unless you had two healthy parents and a perfect childhood and a great personality, go for chemistry. Because the chemistry has a lot to do with the internalization of your relationships with your parents and the early love relationships you had with your parents. By the time you're 5 years old, it's set in the brain, and that's the gyroscope that's going to orient you in terms of chemistry. Now, most of us don't have that perfect childhood. Most of us don't have that well-adjusted mother and father. So I often say, if you feel on a 1 to 10 scale at 10, have great sex with the person, but don't marry them. Don't marry them. Have great sex. Enjoy it, okay? But don't marry somebody that's below a 5, because you're going to think, oh, nuts, I got to go to bed with this person. Okay, I got a headache. It's going to be tough for you. It really will. Marry somebody, if you had a difficulty with your parents, your first love objects, and at 6, a 7, and 8, you know what? Even after years of marriage, it tends to drift into that anyway, but you'll be making love to your best friend. So I often tell people healthy compromises by understanding your first love relationships, understanding your personality, and go for somebody first that will be your best friend for life. Second, do you enjoy making love to them? Because if you don't, just forget it. Just move on. I mean, that's a deal breaker right there. You've got to really love just being physically intimate with that person. If that's not there, it's not going to really last very long. But if there's a great scene with in Moonstruck, what's her name? Olympia Dukakis says to Cher, she says, you love him. If you love him, it's going to be heartache. And what she's really saying is, if it's only about chemistry, you're going to be eating your heart out in your marriage. It's got to be your best friend.
Yeah, thank you so much. So when you talk about men and women, that got me thinking, you know, what about the difference between men and women, how they talk about stress? I know my husband talked very little about his stress, but when I'm stressed, I would just come on and say it. Is there a different coping mechanism between men and women that are signs that we need to watch out for?
Paglia, she calls herself a neo-feminist from the University of Pennsylvania. She said, when women complain that men aren't good communicators, it's the fault of the women. Because in evolutionary history, women would want to reproduce for survival value to men who are good hunters. And if you're going to be a good hunter, you can't go in a hunting party and chit chat with the guy next to you about how he made his spear and how good he looks in his furs. You know, you have to be quiet. Hunters must be quiet. Meanwhile, women, to have the species survive, has to be in constant communication, non-verbal. Remember, language is fairly recent. Non-verbal communication with everybody in the tribe and with the children and the infants. Women internationally, regardless of culture, are better at reading the emotion of faces if you show them pictures than men. It wasn't important for the male brain to read emotional expressions. They'll misread their partner's face. A woman could look at a face and say, "You're lying to me." That's not what's going on. Men will say, "How do they know?" It's through evolutionary history. So men tend to be more nonverbal, but their emotions are just as strong as women. They feel just as strongly, but they don't communicate. On top of that, mothers respond to their sons differently than their daughters. So you have things in the primitive brain, and then you have socializations. Mothers respond to the emotions very differently to their daughters. To boys, they unconsciously tend to toughen them up. To daughters, they tend to respond more, and they have a more intense, what I mean by intense, mothers and daughter communication is far more emotional than it is with the sons overall. Now, I always tell when I do couples counseling, the way to get a man to open up, you can't talk to a man like you would to a woman. You have to say, "Honey, for me to feel closer to you, I need you to tell me how you feel." See, a man is very happy to give his partner a favor, to grant her, but if it's a demand and if it's a complaint, he'll shut down. He won't feel masculine, he'll feel inadequate. But if you say, "Do me a favor," he feels empowered to do a favor. So say, "Do me a favor, please share more with me. I need to feel closer to you." And I do feel closer when you do share.
Got it. Well, thank you. I will make sure I use it on my husband tonight. Do me a favor. Let's see. I'll let you know if that works. Now, as far as the vulnerable population, like kids and teenagers and the older population, what are your recommendations for them as far to deal with social isolation in this period?
Really young kids, they'll be fine. Okay, the kids, little kids pick up on the emotions of their parents. People worry about my COVID babies and toddlers. They'll be fine if you're fine. Again, they pick up on that. Teenagers will always act like, "You're ruining my life. It's the end of the world," because they will verbalize their complaints much more than younger children. "You're ruining my life. This is the end of my life. I can't go to the prom. This is the end." And I don't know how many of you remember your prom, but it's no big deal. But for a teenager, it's life and death. So you just be a good listener to your adolescents. As they say, I may as well drop dead because I'm dying in this COVID. They're not dying. It'll be something to tell their children about. They'll be fine. Most of their personality is already formed by adolescence. So they make a lot of noise, they complain, listen empathically, they're fine. The ones that are most vulnerable are in the middle, actually, kind of like the tweens. They know what's going on. They're still forming their personality. They're still working on their self-esteem. That's really the most vulnerable age. Now, what do you do as a parent? You can't fix the world for them. You help them to cope with reality. You empathize with them. Empathy doesn't mean making everything all right. You can't do that. But letting them know, I know how you feel. You're right to feel that way. If I could change it, I really would. Now, what would you like to do? What can we do? How can we have fun together?
So active listening, definitely. And what about people like my parents, their age, the seniors, where you can't go out with them anymore, and because they're in a vulnerable situation right now? What do you have to say for people with elderly parents?
Fine. For them, Aristotle once said that grandparents and grandchildren are natural allies because they have a common enemy, their parents. So, so what's really important for grandparents is to see their grandchildren. I just saw my granddaughters over, video conferencing. And that's really important for me. I wish I could see them and hug them and kiss them, but being able to see that is really important. And you know what? Little kids hate telephones. You shouldn't stick a telephone in a kid's face. They want to see you. And luckily, we're in an age, this wasn't the case during the Spanish flu, but we're in an age where your grandkids could see the face of the grandparents, and you can make funny faces and make jokes with them and see them. And that's a very good feeling. But Tina, it still comes down to personality. There's some people that are introverts or avoid personalities. They like cocooning. They feel relieved. They don't have to see people. They are very happy with social isolation. This is the best world for them. They're catching up on the books. They don't have to act pleasant when they see people. They're really great. Extroverts are tearing their hair out. They're pacing the floors. They're just really, really frustrated. This is a very bad time for them. And I have an extroverted friend, and he calls me up all the time, and he would chat all day long. And I have to say, I have to get off the phone now. But he's calling everybody. So it depends a lot on the personality.
Interesting. Wow. So you talk about personality. One question that came up from the audience is that, I think half of the people here are from Silicon Valley, and we're often very, very accomplishment driven, for better or worse. So a lot of the conversations I have with friends and colleagues are, well, what do I do with all my goals? I have all these things I'm trying to do in 2020. I'm having a hard time meeting them. And yet my manager or myself feel like I should meet it. What do you say to those ambitious folks that want to do everything still?
It's a good question. In my case, I'm lucky. As a forensic psychologist, I do evaluations. I testify in court. I do psychotherapy. And only within the last year or so, I'm doing it all online. I'm all doing it by video conferencing. I was able to transfer successfully all my work with less overhead through video conferencing, the therapy, even testifying in court, doing assessments, psych testing, all online. So it works. Some people can't do that as well. So it's going to be harder for them in meeting those goals. One thing don't give up on, and that's the psychological trait of ambition. It's important to have ambition. Don't compromise on that. What will change is the means of actualizing your goals. In other words, I'm relying more on video conferencing. You might have to be thinking outside the box. You might have to get more creative. This is the world of a paradigm shift. The ones who are successful are able to ride the shift and think and work in a different way. The goals may have been tied to a different means in the past. You can't get from here to there anymore. And the ones that are making a lot of money in this age have been able to think, how do I use the virtual world in a way that is going to help me be successful? You're doing that with Travonde. My God, people are stuck. And now they have Travonde to look at and they think, gee, what do we do? Hey, there's a new website I can go to, and there's all kinds of people I could meet and do, and things I could plan with myself, my family, and things like that. And you're riding that paradigm shift with your Travonde. You like that plug, Tina?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. So another question that we have that somebody sent in is how do you know when the stress is too much and they will need to contact a professional? Like, what are the signs that we should look for in ourselves, our kids, and our family to see a professional?
If you're wondering if you should see one, then you see one. The National Institute for Mental Health did a national study, and they found that only 20% of people that they found would benefit from psychotherapy. Only 20% actually follow through in it. It's the opposite in medicine. For physical symptoms, 80% of people will contact a physician, 20% won't. And why is that? Well, if you have a physical problem, you feel victimized by that problem. If we get COVID, we become the victim of that disease. But when it comes to a psychological issue, we feel not so much the victim, we feel that somehow there's a weakness in our character, that we should be strong enough to deal with the depression or the anxiety or stress. There's something wrong with us. And you shouldn't think that way. People in business always get consultants. No one in business says, oh, I'm good at everything. Sales, human relations, accounting, marketing. Nobody says that. They get consultants. A good therapist is a consultant for your life, everything, your personality, your mood, your relationships. And don't think about signing up for psychotherapy. Sign up for a one-session consult with an expert. See if you like the person. See if the person gets you. See how much you benefited from that one consult. Then you can decide if you want more. But if you think maybe I should, then you should. Then you definitely should contact somebody. What I hear all the time after the first session, I should have done this years ago. I didn't know it would be so valuable.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you. I like the way you put it. Getting a therapist or a coach is like having a business consultant. So I have a couple other questions. A lot of people are having insomnia during this period. Any suggestions for them? Both physical and maybe some mental strategies that they can embark upon?
First, let me explain how important sleep is. All creatures, all living creatures have to sleep. And even Caroline's dog has to sleep. Your dog dreams. You ever notice when your dog dreams with the feet going and twitching and everything like that? Yeah. We sleep in order to dream. Dreaming is defragging your brain. And the military did studies about people who had to be on watch for hours, for days, nights, on watch. What happens? People go psychotic when they're sleep deprived. They actually start hallucinating and become psychotic. We do know when people take exams and they stay up all night, it's like they're drunk. Even driving, they do tests in laboratories that when you get not enough sleep, the people do in research labs in terms of simulated driving, the same as though they're driving drunk. People think sleeping is inactivity, doing nothing. So if you want to stay up and watch TV or read the book or do something extra, you're just taking away from doing nothing. Well, we do know biologically, sleep is one of the most important things for your body, and particularly the organ of the brain. You could YouTube this. There's actually a new functional MRI of the brain when it's dreaming, washing itself. You'll see a fluid going over the cerebrospinal fluid, actually getting rid of toxins in the brain. It's like watching a washing machine. We didn't know it existed.
Wow.
The brain also rewires. It's called defragging. And when you notice, when you have a dream, if you remember dreams, you're dreaming about at least 4 hours a night. Out of about 8 hours, you're dreaming. And the dream is defragging and rewiring your emotions. You notice in a dream, you could be dreaming about childhood, high school, and what happened that day. And it makes no difference because when you're asleep, you can't tell time. You cannot tell time. So the dream is a hologram of your whole emotional life. That's why psychoanalysts like myself are so interested in your dreams. We can look into that file and realize what's still unresolved. When I work with people who've been to war, and commonly when they have PTSD, why would they dream of the horrors of war? Was the brain is trying to metabolize that. So psychoanalysts are very interested in what's running in the background, what app is running in the background of things that are unresolved because the brain stores everything. Now, right, you might not remember where you put your glasses, your keys, or a person's name. That stuff didn't happen in evolutionary history, but your emotions were there all along. And Caroline's dog has in its limbic system the same emotion that Caroline has. The actual dogs and cats have the same exact emotions that human beings have. What they don't have is the frontal lobe, the bullshit lobe. That's why we love cats. They don't bullshit, but we develop this, the bullshit, but it also gives us empathy and moral reasoning. But when we go to sleep, that goes offline, and we get pure emotions from the lower part of our brain. So you find out what's happening. When you don't get enough sleep, the cerebral cortex has a hard time functioning. There's a lot of, another way I say to my patients, every organ needs to metabolize nutritions and has to excrete. And your brain, when it's dreaming, is taking a bowel movement. Now, how do you feel if you haven't had a bowel movement in a month? Okay? So you better sleep, and you have to sleep at least 8 hours to get at least your 4 to 6 hours of dreaming in. Now, say you're having problems because of stress. Everybody goes through a period where they're not sleeping well. The longer it continues, your brain sets its biological clock based on waking up at 3 o'clock or having trouble getting to sleep. Actually, the brain goes into patterns, just like we have jet lag. It starts to learn a pattern and wants to stay like that. The only way to break the pattern, and I'm a psychologist, I don't push medication, but after working years with people with sleep problems, you'll need medication, and then you'll wean off of it. You've got to break that pattern. Start with something over the counter. It could be melatonin. It could be one of the sleep aids over the counter. If that doesn't work, you get a prescription. And you only take it for a short term, and you wean off. And as you're weaning off, learn to meditate when you're laying in bed. Go to bed the same time every night. The brain wants a pattern. It's got to condition itself. It's got to be used to a pattern. You got to give it that pattern. No matter what, go to sleep within about a half hour every night. Set your alarm, except for weekends, when you want to sleep in, of course. But try to wake up. It doesn't have to do with what you want. It's what your brain needs. But I always like to get people forced into a pattern with good medication for sleep and then wean off. Now, when you think, this part will keep the sleep center from kicking in. The sleep center says, no, I can't go to sleep. my brain is still working. When you do something like meditating, focusing on your breath, saying or say relax or sleep, the part that's obsessing, that's thinking about the next day, that's worrying, starts to get bored with your meditation, winds down, and you fall asleep. You know the whole thing about counting sheep?
Yes.
It's a way to make the frontal lobe bored so you wind down to sleep. When you think about, oh my God, I got to get the spreadsheet. Oh, did I remember to do this? Sleep gets put in the back burner and your cerebral cortex keeps you awake to keep thinking. So the more you start thinking and worrying, it'll keep you awake. You got to make this part bored so you wind down into sleep.
Yeah. Well, my husband always tell me baseball scores to make me bored, so I fall asleep that way.
Sleep.
Well, talking about my husband, we actually have a question from the audience. I think Megan said, you really love your tips about talking to your spouse and the difference between male and female. What are your tips around tweens? You know, the 12, 11-year-old. Her question is, it's hard to know what is normal tween behavior versus something that is going on. That's really psychologically more deepening. And that how do we let them know that we're not nagging them, but we want to make sure, how do we make them feel heard? How do we tell the difference between, is it a pandemic thing or is it something that we really do need the help with?
One visual, think of a pyramid, okay? And think of the variable of strictness. When they're really young, you want to be really strict, not mean, rationally strict. As they get older, you have to become less strict. With teenagers, when you're real strict with teenagers, think when you're a teenager, you'll get compliance, but their personality is already formed. If you're a good person, they'll be good people. They'll look like assholes now, but later on they'll be good people. They've internalized their values by the time they're 10 or 12 years old. Their personality is pretty formed. Teenagers will test the limits, they'll be annoying and stuff like that. Punishment really doesn't work with teenagers. You sit them down and you say, you know what? You hurt my feelings, you're being inconsiderate. You don't have to say anything more. That's all you have to do is say, I was disappointed in you. You have good values. You know better. That's all you have to do with teenagers. Don't bother punishing them. It only means that you're pissed off and you have no more power. That's why parents punish their teenagers. But in the tweens, you have to be strict. But remember, before you start to punish a child, you better be able to verbalize what the violation is rationally. You can't do it. It just has to do with your narcissism, your need for power, your triggers. You should be able to say, okay, you're being punished because you were mean to your brother, or you're being punished because you made a promise and you broke it and I kept asking you. And the punishment is to make you think about it. I know you're a good person. And that's what you do with the tweens. Now, in terms of when they are really upset, it depends how long it lasts. Like, for example, I said, if you think you might want to talk to somebody, do it. If you're not sure, you can have a one-session consult with a psychologist. The psychologist will know and know what questions to ask and say, well, this is normal for a 12-year-old. This is typical of a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old. They'll say, no, a 12-year-old girl should not be hating food. A 12-year-old girl should not be cutting herself. A 12-year-old girl should not be really moping around for weeks at a time. Yes, for a couple of days at a time, especially if she's, having her period, or she's having her disappointments in friends, or feels rejected. It'll feel like the end of the world to her. That's normal. And most kids don't want advice. They want to know that they're okay and that you get them. There's something we call tracking. It's a little bit different. Tracking means, oh, you said it, Tina, active listening. Tracking means that when you're listening, every now and then you'll say a word and the person will know, oh my God, they were really hearing me. You can't do anything more respectful than that. And then they settle in. They know, you know what? I'm with somebody who really gets me. I'm safe in this world. I feel protected. And they're all right.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's so important, especially in this unsafe world, to make them feel safe by listening to them.
Means that you help them to cope with it. You don't want to tell them that they're living in Toontown where nobody ever dies and no one ever gets lost or things like that. Bad things happen, but you give them coping mechanisms. And one of the coping mechanisms of social animals is that we get together and say, gee, this worries me. What do you do about it? How can I go online and check facts, versus rumors? And you give them these coping skills so they feel empowered. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, that is very important. Every 2 hours, my son will come to me and say, hey, guess what CNN said? Guess what this? I just have to turn it off sometimes. So what's your advice on that? About what's healthy social media consumption? I know that we have our notification on all the time. Every 5 minutes, click, click, click. Trump did this. This is COVID-19. There's numbers.
Donkey. I can't get enough of it. But there's something called Media Watch, and they'll actually tell you which ones are too far to the right and which ones are too far to the left, and which ones are really balanced. And it's good to check sources like Media Watch. Now we have confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm.
If someone, and we could predict by a person's personality if they're going to be right wing or left wing, conservative or progressive. We can tell by their personality. It's very stable. But with confirmation bias, a lot of people don't want fair and balanced news. They just want something that validates it. And really, you're not going to change that. For most people, and this is a healthy brain wants to weigh evidence so they make the best choices in life based on reality, and they're not looking for a confirmation bias. They'll look for news sources that are respectful, that places like Media Watch will say is kind of like very, very fair. And it helps you to deal with reality that way. Now, there are some people that are too anxious. Someone with me, like I'm an intellectual. I love information. Information is my candy, as an intellectual. So people who have an anxious personality, I'll say, you know what? Turn it off. Trump is not going to call you up and ask your advice anyway. So if you're not up on the latest information, believe me, no one in Washington is going to be at a loss because you didn't keep up with what's going on in the world. It's making you nervous. Turn it off. Limit your information input. You have to be true to yourself. You got to know yourself. Someone like me, I would probably get more anxious if I was in the dark. I feel more secure when COVID-19 first started coming out. Now, I teach online for several years, Chinese psychologists. I teach in the Chinese American Psychoanalytic Alliance, and Chinese psychologists online learn psychoanalysis. And I have a lot of friends in Wuhan. And when it first started hitting there, I got information that few Americans were getting, was many of my students are physicians. And they were saying, Dr. Gordon, stock up, get masks now, get alcohol now, get canned foods now. Tina, the only thing they didn't tell me was to get toilet paper. Who would have thought? I mean, that's just a crazy American panic to get toilet. The only thing I didn't have. But my friends in China were telling me and I started reading everything about not just COVID, but virology and epidemiology, and I was ready for it. I felt empowered compared to everybody else. And when people were spinning it, I went to the best sources. So I wanted news, I wanted facts, I wanted science. For some of my patients, I said, turn it off.
listen to music, read your favorite books, talk with your friends. You got to know who you are and how to regulate your self-esteem and your anxiety in a way in terms of your personality.
So as far as that's a very, very good point. Cater the solution to your personality. Do you have any books or anything that you can recommend to the audience about kind of learning more about who they are? I think this is a great period for each of us to understand how we cope with stress and what's the personality type that we are and our family and our spouses.
I love your question, obviously, because I'm an analyst.
Right.
When you go into a bookstore or looking at Amazon, you see boilerplate things for people to deal with anxiety. And it does help a lot of people. I have a friend of mine. He's a retired MD cancer researcher, brilliant. And his company paid to have someone come in and teach relaxation. And he said to me, I got panicky. I had a panic attack when they were teaching me how to relax. Could you explain it to me? And I said, well, because I'm a psychoanalyst, I go immediately to you as a particular personality. You're a great scientist and you're obsessive compulsive and you're a control freak. And when you started to relax, you started feeling out of control.
Mm.
And that made you anxious. So don't use meditation. Don't use relaxation training. When you start to get anxious, you should do something active like yoga or exercise.
Mm-hmm.
You're a control freak. Being passive will make you more anxious. So I knew his personality. I knew he was a control freak. I knew he was obsessive compulsive. So I prescribed in a way that's consistent with his personality.
Mm.
Now, the only books that will tell you this are psychoanalytic books, and some of them are unreadable. So if you could find a book that's psychoanalytically oriented about anxiety, it would be more helpful to you. But basically, the best thing is you could go online and talk to a psychoanalyst anywhere in the country, the best psychoanalyst in the world now. And there are psychoanalytic institutes in every single city, and everybody is online now, and you can get a consultation with a world-class psychoanalyst. Now, a psychoanalyst generally has a doctorate in psychology or medicine. They go another 5 years. They go through their own psychoanalysis, which is like 4 or 5 times a week for 5 years, like what I did. So you really know yourself. And so it's not just intellectual study. And about 4 or 5 years of training, supervised cases, and didactic learning. So these people aren't boilerplate counselors. It's more expensive, but it's worth it. And believe me, you don't have to be on a couch for 5 years. You can do 1 session consultation and say, this COVID thing, I don't know who I am anymore. I feel isolated. I feel uncertain in this world. I don't want an analysis. What could you tell me? And the guy says, okay, I need to see you just 3 times, and I need to know more about you. How did your mother soothe you when you were anxious? My mother was busy working. She was very critical. And your father? My father was a good man, but he was very busy too. Okay, you don't have an internal soother. It's unconscious, but every infant toddler, as they go through the separation, and they go from mother to the blanket, or the pacifier to the teddy bear, to separation, needs soothers. And if you don't have one, you're going to have certain coping mechanisms, like feeling in control. All right, if you don't feel in control. Some people use substances. Some people have workaholism. But whatever it is, you don't have an internal soother, because I learned something about your childhood. So unlike other people, you're going to have a psychological app. Other people will be unconscious and automatic because they had their mother internalized. And it's like getting dosed. They feel anxious, their mother's voice, their mother's tone, their mother's arms are automatically there, and they calm themselves down. They don't even know how they do it. But you don't have that. You're going to have to work to do it your whole life. but you'll get better and better at it. And an analyst could tell you that in 2 or 3 sessions. I could do that with patients just by asking them certain questions. What happened between you and your mother, your primary soother in childhood? Where was she? How did she deal with things? How did your father deal with things? And then I'll know what's in your brain, and I'll tell you what you have to do. And you can do that with just a few consultation sessions. You won't get that.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gordon. This has been so interesting. I feel like I just came out of a psychoanalysis session, one-on-one. I think we have a couple minutes, and I would want to say thank you so much, Dr. Gordon. Thank you, Bruce from Redwood City. Thank you, Barbara from Adaptive PE. And thank you, the audience, for being an active listener and also for all your questions. I want to make sure that we end on time. Dr. Gordon, do you have any last words? We have 2 minutes.
Wish you all luck and good health and safety, and listen to the experts.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gordon. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very helpful.